Well, we see clearly now into the July 13th Trump rally that went horribly, horribly wrong. And this podcast will be a special update on the most recent news about that shooting. You're going to hear directly from the new director of the Secret Service, the new acting director, that is. You're going to hear all about it on today's podcast. It's what some people are calling, well, they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals interviewed or participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. Charlie Crime Buster, charliecrimebuster.com, and peacemakernetwork.com are copyrights owned by Charlie Crime Buster. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Charlie Crime Buster. Now, we planned to do another episode, but some new stuff came out over the past week, especially when the new acting Secret Service director actually appeared before a Senate committee. We're going to tell you all about that on today's program. But first, let me take a moment to welcome those new listeners who join us every week at Charlie Crime Buster. Hey, we'd like for you to reach out with a shout out. That's right, reach out with a shout out. You can reach me, charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. If you'd like to support the program, well, go on over to peacemakernetwork.com. There you become a badge supporter if you like, BADGE. You can do that for as little as $3 a month. It'll help us with the podcast, but more importantly, it'll help us help those brave men and women who run toward danger instead of away from danger. Yep, talking about the brave men of law enforcement and women, and the brave men and women of first responders, and of course, our brave military. All of that you can read about at peacemakernetwork.com. If you'd like to get caught up on the episodes, a whole bunch of them there for you, go to charliecrimebuster.com, charliecrimebuster.com. Don't forget also, we have now launched our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and slash that Charlie Crime Buster, and you can join us as we talk about these episodes. Every week, James Buckland, our producer, and myself, we have a heart-to-heart talk about the episodes. Love for you to join us. Don't forget in all of this to hit that subscribe button, like us, and don't forget to alert the notification so you know when the last podcast or YouTube channel episode has been dropped. Well, that's our housekeeping. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about some of the things that have happened, and boy, a whole lot of things have indeed happened. You see now, there is a new acting director of the Secret Service. His name is Ronald L. Rowe, Jr., and he recently came before the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. And his opening statement, my friend, it gave us a whole lot of good information. Some of that information, by the way, will clear up some questions that we've all had, maybe even correct some misinformation that had been out there. Now, if you recall in our past podcasts, I told you that we're just delivering it as it's published, and we warn you that some of it may be corrected as more information comes out. You see, I'll try to point those times out as we look over this opening statement of the acting director, Mr. Ronald L. Rowe, Jr. Now, one thing that I found that was refreshing as he began was that he actually admitted, well, here's what he said, folks. He said that the attempted assassination of former President Trump on July the 13th, there at that campaign rally, we know now in Butler, Pennsylvania, get this, and I'm quoting him, he said it was, quote, a failure on multiple levels. Did you get that? Failure on multiple levels. Now, you say, that's not surprising, Charlie. We already knew that. Yeah, we knew that, but now this is coming straight from the Secret Service, from the horse's mouth, if you please. You see, he, unlike others also that I thought was refreshing, he did not appear to throw local law enforcement under the bus as a scapegoat. but he did attempt to offer facts. And he offered those facts whether they harmed the agency or not in the eyes of other people. Now, he did take the time to give praise to those special agents. We've already talked about those guys. Remember that? Those guys and gals who shielded the former president by placing their bodies in the line of fire. Those who were willing to, quote, make the ultimate sacrifice without hesitation. Hey, think about that for a moment. How would you like to have a job where you put someone else's safety beyond your own, to the very place that your spouse or partner may not ever see you again, and to the very point that you may not ever see your own beloved children again? In a moment's notice, without any thought whatsoever, put your body in front of a bullet for somebody else, even if you do not like that person. Well, my friend, this is what the brave men and women of the Secret Service do. And we can, regardless of all this that we're finding that's wrong, we can certainly admire that, and we do. Now, the director, he also went and praised the other men and women who, as we often say on the podcast, run toward danger instead of away from danger. We're talking again about the brave men and women of the local law enforcement. He actually gave gratitude in his statement to the federal, state, and local partners. He stated that the Secret Service, that they relied on these critical relationships that's been built over the years. Now, don't get me wrong, this was not words of some love fest, sending up smoke and mirrors. He did, I believe, really got down to what I call the nitty-gritty in this opening statement. And as I stated in our last crime talk that we have on our YouTube channel, we cannot and must not wait until months later in hearings to fix what went wrong. We must immediately do that now. And I'll have to say, he did lay out in his opening statement exactly what that meant in very plain language. Now, my friend, to be fair, in his statement, Rowe is not without his own detractors. There are some who are even saying that he is a part of the systematic blame of what went wrong on that day. That he was a part of that group that held back services when they should have been provided. And my friend, news recently has just come out this week also that this was the first time within the campaign there on the Trump rally or the Trump group of people that protect him, this was the first time the Secret Service sent out counter-sniper teams. Now, I did not see that addressed in the opening statement, but if it is true, think about how many others may have died that day had they not had a counter-sniper team at that event. Well, all of that, we're going to talk about that. We'll look up on that upon another day. But today, we want to focus on what the very statement communicated to us by the acting director of the Secret Service. His opening statement, well, it spoke volumes. We're going to focus in on that right here on today's podcast. We're going to do all that in a minute, but right now it's time for what we call our Crazy Crook Story. You see, we always share a crazy crook story to kind of lighten the load of the dark stuff we share. Now, we've all heard about dating apps. We've all heard about those folks that get into all kinds of precarious situations using dating apps. But in Iowa, this is a different take on it. It appears that an Iowa woman, well, she got cold feet before her first date with a man, that she had met on a dating app. But, my friend, you can't make this up. Instead of simply canceling the date, well, the woman, she dialed up 911. And she falsely, get this, falsely accused this man that she was going to meet for her first date. She accused him of being her abusive ex-boyfriend who threatened to stab her. That's according to police. You You see, just after midnight on June the 16th, a 911 call, well, it was made to authorities up there in North Liberty, Iowa. The woman said told to the operator, the 911 operator, that an abusive ex-boyfriend was at her home and threatening her. She reported him threatening to cause harm to her. At least that's what the court documents read. Now the woman claimed that the man was the father of her unborn baby. Yep, and that he was sending her threatening messages. That he was going to hit, punch, kick, and stab her. That was according to an affidavit that came from Law and Crime. Now, police did respond to the residents. They did confront a man leaving the home, and they did begin a quote-unquote in-depth investigation. However, that poor guy, he explained he had never met the woman, never met her in person. No, not in person. He had matched with her on a dating site just over a week prior. Explained that the two had made plans to meet up at her house that night, but she did not answer the door. And that poor unidentified man, well, he was detained for the police for more than an hour. He said their recent communication had shifted, well, away from the dating app to a direct text messages. Now get this. After the investigators reviewed those text messages between the two, well, the police then determined, well, that the conversation showed that he was being honest. He really did just meet this female. And meanwhile, the woman, you remember her, she had told the police that, well, she had known the man for 2 years. He wouldn't leave her alone. She was pregnant with his baby. She claimed that it was abusive, threatening. But this lady, Miss Thomas, 18 years of age, she finally admitted, around the third interview with investigators, well, she admitted that the accusations against the man were false. She confessed that she, quote, unquote, got cold feet. Did you hear that? She got cold feet about meeting the man for a date, and so she fabricated the allegations. She said she didn't think the police would come to help her unless she faked a more dire and pressing situation. Well, you better be careful you do that, because Thomas, the lady who made that terrible, terrible accusation, she was charged with 2 counts of false report, which is indictable offense, and 1 count of false report 911 call. She was arrested, but later released, holding over for trial. So my friend, this crazy woman, instead of just telling the guy that she didn't want to go out with him and she was changed her mind, no, she didn't do that. She was so crazy she called the police, made up a big lie, put the guy in trouble. This crazy lady is indeed Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Now back to our main focus. Here we have Mr. Lowe, the acting director of the Secret Service. Here he is standing before the committee. And his statement, well, it basically identified gaps in security and shared some corrective actions. That's what we're going to share on the podcast based on his statement. So I was pleased to see that he immediately addressed, well, what we all saw as the greatest security breach of all. You remember that, don't you? Yep, that uncovered roof. You know what we share has been said, and by many others, about that roof. Why in the world was it uncovered? And we heard all kinds of things. Somebody said, well, it's too hot to be up there. Somebody said, well, somebody was sick, wasn't there. Somebody else said 2 agents was assigned it, and they had to go look for this other suspicious person. All kinds of things have been said. But what does the director say about that uncovered roof? Well, here it is. I'm going to give it to you by quote. I'm quoting him now. He said, quote, "One of my first actions as acting director was traveling to the Butler Farm Show site, which was no longer a crime scene. But I went there to better, he said, quote, to better understand how our protection failed. He goes on to say, now get this, quote, I inspected the site and the AGR building. I went to the roof of the AGR building where the assailant fired shots. I laid in a prone position to evaluate his line of sight." He goes on to say, listen to this, he says, "What I saw made me ashamed." Follow that up with this. Listen to this. as a career law enforcement officer and a 25-year veteran with the Secret Service, I cannot defend why that roof was not better secured. Did you hear that? Quote, I cannot defend why that roof was not better secured. Wow. He admitted it. That was a biggie. What a security breach. He went on to say to prevent similar lapse in occurring in the future, that he was going to direct all the personnel to ensure every event site security plan is thoroughly vetted by multiple experienced supervisors before it's implemented. Hey, you know what? That might mean that it was not vetted by multiple experienced supervisors. Well, now, my friend, we know that the former director, remember Miss Cheeto, she did not even visit the site. Rowe went there and he said he found something that made him immediately ashamed, and he did say that they were immediately working on fixing the problem. Next, if you recall in our crime talk that we do every week after the podcast during the week, you can go on over to YouTube channel /CharlieCrimebuster to find those. But in our crime talk last week, I brought up the fact that according to reports, the shooter used a drone to recon the area. And to our knowledge, the Secret Service did not use one of their own, or they did not even request or allow law enforcement to use drones in providing security on that day. So what did the director say in his opening statement about that? Here's what he says. As such, quote, I have directed the expanded use of unmanned aerial systems, commonly referred to as drones, at protective sites to help direct threats on roofs and other elevated areas. Wow. That's what we said should have happened. Should have happened then. May have prevented a shooting. But he said from this point on, he said, I've directed expanded use of drones at protective sites. Now, while it was not covered in his opening statement during the questioning of the director, there was a reason why that drone that was flown by the shooter was not detected. This was found out in the questioning. You see, Rose said that problems, get this, quote unquote, with Wi-Fi connectivity affected the Secret Service's counter-drone operations, which were not working when crooks flew a drone over the rally site earlier that day. Well, apparently there was some kind of counter-active drone operation, but nope, wasn't working. Just wasn't working. Oh, wow. Now, if you remember, during our YouTube crime talk last week, I also talked about that I felt there was definitely a breakdown in communications. That is, as to local law enforcement speaking directly with the Secret Service. Now, you're going to hear a little bit about this in a few minutes from now, but here is what Rose said in the opening remarks before the committee. He says, quote, I've also directed resources to facilitate our protective site communications, particularly our communications with state and local partners, where a delay of even, now listen to this closely, where a delay of even a few seconds in communication can make a difference in life and death. He said these resources will provide enhanced radio and common operating picture communications that were not present in Butler. You hear that? That's a great omission, that they were not present in Butler. Next, he addressed the manpower issue, again, which we commented on last week's Crime Talk. Not heard that? Go to Charlie Crimebuster's YouTube channel, listen to the latest episode. He went on to say, quote, I have instructed that asset requests for Secret Service protection details be approved expeditiously and ordered the maximum use of Secret Service special agents, uniformed division officers, and technical support personnel at protective sites to address this heightened security environment. All that talk just means, yep, we're going to get the right kind of manpower there to correct these terrible, terrible mistakes. Now, he also admitted that they have handled additional events even since then, and they've added additional people to protect. Of course, we all know that means the vice president nominee, Senator J.D. Vance, along with his family. And they also added, finally now, after this glaring, terrible mess with the Secret Service, they also now decided they were going to protect candidate Robert F. Kennedy. Amazing to me, the Secret Service was not available to Kennedy prior to this Trump shooting. Ridiculous. But he went on to say now that they're going to protect him. He also said that he would hold any people responsible, those employees that violated agency protocols. See, a lot of the senators that day, they were really upset that nobody had been fired yet. He did say that they were going to look at it, and as it warranted, he would take care of that, but not moving there quite as quickly as that Senate committee would like to see him. Then, as often happens in people trying to cover their own mistakes, he assured the committee that he also would enhance the protective measures to make sure that the records retention would retain all records regarding the agency's planning, operations, and response to the July 13th attack. That's good. Remember, my friend, where there are always paper and digital trails to follow. But sometimes those go missing in investigations. He assured the committee that would not happen, and that he put all kinds of, he worked on it and made sure that wouldn't happen. Now, next, he takes the time in this opening statement to lay out the situation as he saw it, with a disclaimer there that, us like we said the other day in our podcast, things could come out to clarify what he is sharing. In other words, what we hear now is his very best, upon what he has come up with so far. So it appears that his statement that it was July the 8th, 5 days before the event, that's when the Pittsburgh field office started planning meetings. They did a site walkthrough. That was along with law enforcement partners and, of course, the campaign staff. So they walked through it. Now, last week I shared with you a timeline based on information that was available to us from information that was shared by law enforcement. And we also shared with you that there was a glaring evidential deal that we were very concerned about, and that was that the shooter was seen on the roof some 20 minutes before he started firing. It was actually claimed by others that the Secret Service knew about it. Now, the Secret Service did not comment on that, but they have now through this opening statement. And here is now the timeline, according to Director Rowe, on what happened that day. Again, on July the 8th, they began planning with a walkthrough. On July the 10th, the Secret Service counter-sniper team arrived in Pittsburgh, and they began the specific advanced planning for that event. That's July the 10th, 3 days before the event. On July the 12th, they would build out the campaign rally, the site, the build-out. And they began to identify line-of-sight issues, challenges, strategies. Then on the 13th, the morning of the event, there was a site briefing, and at that briefing was Secret Service and law enforcement partners supporting the event. Then the Secret Service personnel took their posts, and they did what is called a technical security sweep of the site. Remember, I talked about the fact that I tried to figure out what happened. How did he get that rifle there on that roof? Did he hide it beforehand? If there had been a security sweep, seemingly that would have been found. So there was a security sweep, and it commenced prior to the opening of the site event to people, vendors, staff, and the public. Then they said at 12:30 on that day, they opened the site to event staff and vendors. They would check people out coming through, through the metal detector. The estimated 15,000 people attended the rally. They checked all those out, even the event staff, the vendors, all that began about 1 p.m. Then he went on and really reached on down to 5:30 when the President Trump's motorcade arrived. Seemed like at that time he met with supporters in the secure backstage area there in the site. Then he says at 5:45 p.m., a local Butler County Management Service Unit counter sniper team member, he texts the Secret Service sniper team about a suspicious person and sent 2 photos of that individual. Now, according to this, that Butler County counter sniper team texts the Secret Service counter sniper team about a suspicious person. According to this, they did not say that he was on the roof or that he had a weapon. Then at 5:53 p.m., remember now, this is just before the shooting. The Secret Service counter sniper team, they emailed the Secret Service counter sniper team again that local law enforcement was looking for a suspicious individual outside the perimeter, lurking around that AGR building. So now they got a person walking around the AGR building. Then at 6 o'clock, we know that President Trump took the stage. Now here's what he said, quote, listen to this very carefully, it's very important. Based on what I know right now, neither the Secret Service counter sniper teams nor member of the former president's security detail had any knowledge that there was a man on the roof of the AGR building with a firearm. He went on to say, it was my understanding that those personnel were not aware that this guy had a firearm until they heard gunshots. You see, at this time, according to him, they were operating with the knowledge, that law enforcement was working on the issue of a suspicious vehicle. But now, wait a minute. There was also another guy that addressed the Senate committee. He was the FBI Deputy Director, Paul Abbott. He says this now. He says that Crooks was first identified at 4:26 p.m., 25 minutes before the shooting. And he went on to say some other stuff. Now, in the opening statement, the director said that it's very common that there will be calls of suspicious people. In fact, he said that on July the 13th, there were over 100 calls to support issues, including people who need general help, medical issues, reports of a missing child, and other issues. All right, we know there was a whole lot going on. But in my opinion, even though there's a whole lot going on, you still don't lose fact of the mission to protect the protectee. And then the FBI director, he said that a local police officer spotted Crooks on the roof within a firearm seconds before he opened fire. He said that surveillance video from a local business captured Crooks getting on the roof of the building around 6:06 p.m. And that at 6:08, he was observed on the roof by local law enforcement. 6:11, a local police officer was lifted to the roof by another officer, saw the shooter, now hold on to this, and radioed that he was armed with a lone gun. This was 30 seconds before shots were fired. So now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. 30 seconds before shots were fired, a radio call went up that there was a man on the roof with a long gun. So, what did the Secret Service, what did he say when questioned about this with the committee? Listen to this. This is vital. He testified that in those 30 seconds or so, radio communication between local law enforcement and federal agents got, quote, stuck. And that information about the shooter on the roof never made it to the Secret Service. Wow. It was radioed 30 seconds ahead of time, but that radio translation got stuck. Never got to the Secret Service. Wow. Did you get that, folks? 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Now, that's very important because I want you to listen to this. At 6:11, the first volley of 3 shots were fired. Within seconds, 3 seconds, the president's detail rushed the stage, covered former President Trump, shielding him with their bodies. Then 15 and a half seconds after the first shot, the Secret Service counter sniper fired a single round that neutralized the assailant. Did you get that? Did you hear that? 15 seconds, they were able to neutralize it. But wait a minute, 30 seconds beforehand, local law enforcement radioed there was a guy with a long rifle on the roof. You know what that means? That means if that information had gotten to the Secret Service, well, this guy could have been taken out before he fired his first shot. But it didn't happen because of that communication glitch. The former director, or the acting director, says it was stuck. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean, stuck? Well, it means that they weren't communicating on the same channel. That's what it means. And that, my friend, is a horrible mistake on a horrible, horrible day that took place there in Butler, Pennsylvania. There you have it. I mean, I think we're getting down to the nitty-gritty right here, folks. It was radioed out 30 seconds beforehand. All right. Boy, time has gone by. This has been fascinating to me. I hope it has been to you. I hope at least it helps you have more information about what happened. But before we leave, hang with me just another minute or two. I've got to summarize what went down. 3 things. Number 1, not covering the roof properly is a given. And it is a momentous failure of the Secret Service. Let me say that again. Not covering the roof properly was a momentous failure of the Secret Service. Number 2, failure of aerial surveillance is very evident. Could have caught this happening in real time, gotten to the counter sniper team in time for them to stop this terrible attack. And number 3, communication through open channels directly to the Secret Service failed the opportunity to stop the shooter before the first shot. 30 seconds. That's an eternity in these moments. Remember, they located and killed the shooter 15 to 16 seconds after he shot. They could have certainly found him in those 30 seconds that law enforcement spotted him with a long rifle. That would have been well timed for them to make the shot before it happened. So, my friend, it is very, very apparent that this is a massive failure upon the part of the Secret Service. It's a sad thing to reveal to you. But hopefully, through learning from these mistakes, we can have a better Secret Service that will take better care of those protectees that they have pledged their own lives to keep safe. So until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert. Yep, for the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag @CharlieCrimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/CharlieCrimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.